and I had reached a very low. I like really reached rock bottom where I was thinking about death all the time. I was thinking about not wanting to be here day in and day out. I'd be at practice to the point where I'm in practice and I can't stop thinking about it.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Big Picture Podcast, where we discuss faith and testimonies and perspectives with the focus on the big picture. I am your host, Susan, and I post every other Wednesday. And I'm really excited for today's episode and conversation with Mahri, who I have never met in person, but we have a mutual friend, Pate, who has actually been on a couple podcast episodes, and Pate just reached out to me and was like, hey, my bestie has a really great story and you should have her on your podcast. So here we are. And we got to talk a little bit before we hit record and just got to hear a little bit of your story. But just for everyone listening, Mahri, could you just share a little bit about who you are, your background, where you grew up, and then what you do? And then definitely want to just get into your story.
Okay, cool. Hey, everybody. My name is Mahri Petree. I'm from Michigan. I was born and raised in Michigan. I lived on 8 Mile in Warren, Detroit area I have two older sisters, a younger brother, and my mom and dad. I grew up in a Christian home. I also grew up in a basketball home. My dad has loved basketball since like forever, and he raised us to love the sport too. So I've been playing all my life. I went to church for a long time when I was young. My mom used to pray over us and make sure we had a relationship with God. And then as I got older, kind of drifted away. But I still played ball. I played at Bradley University in college. I played at UTEP. And then I spent my last year at Purdue. So 6 total years in college. It wasn't until around the third year that I really found Christ. And learned about the word of God and learned who he was through the word and through the truth. And I think it really transformed my life. So I guess that just sums up a little bit of my background.
All right, awesome. So grew up in Michigan. I used to live in Ohio, so know a little bit about
Okay.
the
Midwest.
Midwest, yeah. So you said you grew up in a Christian home and a basketball home. So did you go to church growing up, and when did you start playing basketball? So I guess like 2 questions.
Yeah. I definitely went to church growing up. I went to Perfecting. It's in Detroit. Marvin L. Winans was my pastor, and they're big in the choir. My mom was in the choir. I was in the choir when I was young. So yeah, and then basketball, I think I started playing. My dad used to put little basketballs in our crib when we were younger. So we've been playing ever since we could really hold a ball. He put us in sports right away. We were playing when we were like little kids. He had little hoops for us in the house, and then yeah, as soon as we could do organized sports, he put us in it.
All right, awesome. So you love basketball. Did you enjoy going to church?
Um, I don't think so. I think it was like when I think of my memories, I'm sure I enjoyed like the people and being with my mom and all of that. But when I was young, we had like Sunday school, so it was separate from the main service. And then when I started getting old enough to be in the main service, I never really knew exactly what was going on. Um, but I just knew everybody was praising and shouting, and I just remember like always having to wear stockings and it being cold and rainy in Michigan and just not liking the feeling of being in a dress and stuff. So my memories aren't always like I loved going to church, but I think whether I was super conscious of it or not, I had real encounters with God and was able to hear the truth. And then when I started having more like consciousness about me, we weren't in the church I grew up in anymore. And I went to a church called Grace Christian. Um, and they had like a whole youth thing where you could go. It was called, I can't remember what it was called. Kids something and Kid Nation. I think that's what it was. And we would go there and we brought our Bibles. They would have games for us. They had like bouncy houses and all this cool stuff. And would just find really unique ways for us to learn the word. And I remember sitting over there, and sometimes they would be like, okay, who can turn to this scripture the fastest? And everybody's flipping through their Bible. And it took me so much longer than the other kids, and I would always like want to compete to figure that out. I think I had a really good experience of going to church during that time. I think that was like right before middle school, or like 6th or 7th grade. And then after that, yeah, we kind of fell away from church a little bit.
So, so can you talk a little bit about that? How did that happen?
Yeah, we moved away from Detroit and came out to Canton to go to better schools, be in a better area. And my parents were still together. We found a church when we came out here, but my mom started working for the first time. And my parents were kind of like splitting up during that time. And so sometimes she would work on Sundays, or sometimes she would just be too tired to take us. And I would want to go. Sometimes I would try to ride my bike or whatever because I felt like really convicted to go. But since everything seemed more lax about going to church all of a sudden, because when we were younger, it was like we're going every single Sunday. We're at Bible study on Wednesday. We're at the study group on Tuesday. We're at choir practice on Thursday. Friday was like a whole week ordeal where my mom was there. Sometimes she would put us to bed and then go, but it was very different from what I was experiencing around that middle school, high school age, where nobody was like saying, okay, let's get up and go to church. So I think everything relaxed around it. And that was how, I guess, it seemed like less of a priority in my family to gather, to read our Bibles or to pray and make God that like making time for him in that way.
Was it like it was more busy? So you were talking about your parents kind of splitting. So were
Mm-hmm.
you living, who were you living with? Like as a kid?
We're all still living together. I live in the Crossings where I'm at right now. We're just in the apartment side, but we lived in a townhouse. And my parents were still in the same place because my dad hadn't like officially moved out yet. So we are still living with both of them. But then over the course of like 3 years, my dad like slowly started to move out, until eventually we were staying with my mom and my dad had found a new apartment.
Okay, so not going to church, was it just getting a little bit busy and hectic with like your parents, or like going through their relationship stuff and then trying to figure out like everything with y'all? Like why did that kind of stop, like that priority of going to church?
I think it was an adjustment, but honestly, I think a lot changed from my mom because my dad believed in God, and I think he still does, but he didn't have his own intimate relationship the same way that my mom had it. My dad grew up, I think, Catholic. He never really had to go to church every Sunday, but they had like a Catholic faith. They would pray the rosary. If there were funerals, they would do like Catholic traditions. But my mom, she got saved by God at a young age and really grew up in a completely different circumstance than my dad. And when she got older, I can't remember exactly when she first started going to church, but she was like the leader of that in our family, which typically you find that the man is like the one that leads those conversations and covers the home and has that priority to chase after God. But it was really my mom. And when we left our home church in Detroit, I think that was like a really big thing because culturally in those type of churches, it's like if you leave, it's kind of taboo. You know, it's not like something that people would support you doing. They kind of see you as like, oh, you're leaving us or like going somewhere else, you know. Um, and I think that took a toll on my mom, and the environment that she went to church in changed. The tradition she was used to changed, and then just events that happened in her life, I think they were so heavy that they really affected the way that she saw God. Um, and when she struggled in her relationship with the Lord, as we all struggle, it affected our whole household. And I think that there was like these big tremors in her relationship with the Lord. And when my parents split up, because we would be able to go to church. You know, I don't think it was something that my mom was working on Sunday during the hours that we could go to church. There were, I think, Sundays she had off, but we just weren't going. And I remember asking my mom if we could go or asking her if we should go. And the response wasn't always like, yeah, honey, let's go to church. It was like she would say something different or point to some struggle that she was having. And I just kind of got the sense that she didn't want to be asked to go, that I was like bothering her in some way to want her to come with me. And then I just kind of felt stuck in the middle because I'm like, I want to go to church, but I don't have no way to get there. But you don't want to go. And I think that's kind of how it happened, kind of how it went down.
How would you say that your parents' divorce affected you as a child, like from your perspective when you were younger and then even looking back?
It was hard to believe that they weren't going to try anymore, because in my mind, I'm like, y'all figure it out. That's what marriage is. And I even remember my parents staying together longer than the friends around me. Like, a lot of friends around me were like, yeah, my parents aren't together anymore. I stay at my dad's or I stay at my mom's. And I remember like thinking like, man, my parents are still together. They still like have breakfast in the morning together, or they still kiss and show affection and stuff like that. And just remembering that disparity. But then that feeling of like, oh, I guess it's time for my family to go through that now. Like it was something that eventually people would go through, or that the idea of marriage lasting forever was not reality. And I struggled. Me and my mom are really close, and we've often kind of navigated life in the same way, super emotionally, very deep, like empathy for other people, and a very high capacity for like emotional pain. And experiencing it in such a way that everybody around me experiences my emotions too. And so when my mom was going through it, I struggled with feeling like there were sides and that somebody was right. And I think the hardest thing was seeing it too intimately as a young girl, what my mom was going through and what my dad was going through. They sat down and had a conversation with us that they were not going to be together anymore. And we were crying and asking questions and stuff. And they were both pretty final about it.
So kind of walk through like your high school journey and then getting ready to go to college, and then you went on to play college basketball. So what was that time like for you? So it's kind of like a different chapter of life.
Pate knows this about my testimony. I've struggled with depression my whole life. But I really struggled with it. That was like another one of those like tremors that my mom experiences was her mom passing, my grandma Kelly. She was really young and had a history of drug abuse. And I think her body had just had enough and just couldn't withstand what she was putting it through. And she died early. And it was very unexpected. And so while my mom was going through that, that was the first like close loss I had ever experienced, somebody passing and seeing like a life right in front of me and then it just not exist anymore. Um, and my sisters have told me often, especially Laisha, she's told me like how scared she would be if I lost somebody else close to me because of how differently like I was. Like I just didn't, it wasn't the same person. I wasn't the same person. The Mahri that she knew was just not there anymore. And I just kind of lived within myself. I lived within my own mind. I don't remember like being super present with the people around me. And while I was in high school, my sisters were with me, but they're in the grade above me. And my oldest sister actually stayed back. So her and my older two siblings were super close. But me, like the youngest, I was like, they kind of didn't really know what was going on in my life. My sister, she reflects on it sometimes and she's like, I don't really know what Mahri was doing. I don't know where she was at or like what was going on. Like we saw each other every day, but it just kind of felt like two different worlds. I was just a loner. I never really felt like I always felt out of place around people. And then like when I first got to high school, my parents were splitting up and I spent one semester at the park at Salem. And then we transferred because of basketball. We transferred basketball in school is what we were saying back then. Cause you ain't allowed to like say, oh, we transfer for basketball. It has to be academics or they're like, you can't transfer.
Of course.
So we like, yeah, it was academics. We want to go to this charter school, but we was out of there for basketball. And we got to the new spot and new people, a transition, living 30 minutes from the community that I was now going to be a part of. And we're driving to school 30 minutes every morning. And my grandma died. And I remember being so distraught by it that even somebody asking me Like, hey, how are you? You know how that's just normal. Hey, how are you? How are you? I was angry. I had like this rage inside of me because I'm like, you really don't care. You don't care. Nobody cares. Like, I was just bitter and I was angry at the world because I was holding so much pain. I remember I'd be sitting in class and I just, like, if I heard one note from a song my grandma used to love, I would just be, my heart would just burst open again and I would feel so much pain. And I lived that way for a long time. I wasn't praying. I wasn't fully interacting with the people around me. There was like maybe two or three people that I would speak to every day that I was cool with, but I just kept my distance from people. And I was smoking a lot of weed. Like, that was another thing too. During my high school years, I think when I was 15, when I first transferred out there, um, I met this girl and she was actually she was gay. And she was like, at that school there was a lot of like girls that were just openly gay. And it was like, what is going on here? This wasn't the same way it was back at Salem. I never like recognized this before, but for some reason that was like a high characteristic of the school that I went to. So I was hanging out with this girl Macy and she seemed cool and I'm like super insecure. I'm depressed. I'm like, I'm going through it. I'm and so she introduced me to smoking weed, and we would smoke when we went over her house sometimes after school. And over the course of the next 3 years, I started developing a really heavy habit of smoking weed. And I continued into college. I don't think I would try not to smoke during the season, during basketball season. I had never smoked during basketball season, but as soon as it ended, I was always blowing heavy. And then when I got to college, I would still stop during the season because we'll get drug tested and stuff. But I just had a heavy habit. Like, I was addicted to smoking weed.
How do you feel like you were doing internally once you got to college?
Well, I got an offer. I think it was my junior year of high school to the same school my older sister was going to. And she was like the basketball prodigy. Like, she was the one that was trailblazing and getting offers and always the best on her team. She was the best on our high school team. And I was like more of a hustle player, more of a role player. I really struggled with having confidence in myself. I stuck to the things that I could safely be successful in without the fear of failure, which was hustling and rebounding, playing defense, and communicating to my team, passing the ball, being a point guard, whatever that was. And when I finally got an offer, I cried a lot. I always had these dreams, like these, I say, childish dreams of this little girl inside of me of what things were going to be or supposed to be. I was a big dreamer. And even when I was young and I would see older players playing ball, I had this vision of what it was, what it looked like, and what it must be like for them to experience it, and what coaches are, and I was going to go and get to have that experience. It wasn't so much just playing basketball. My dream was tied to what I would experience through basketball. And I remember telling my coach on the phone, I'm crying and stuff. And I'm like, I just really want to thank you because you see me. And this wasn't necessarily based off of her actually seeing me the way that I thought she saw me or I wanted her to see me. It was just my idea of what was going on. And when I said that, I meant that she saw my struggles. She saw what I was trying to become. I'll say this too. Before I left for college, my older sister was in college and my mom was working at Delta, so we had free flights. And because things and tension was so bad at home, and I was so depressed and I just wanted to be away from my mom so I could just smoke and just chill and not think about stuff. She would let me go up there on the weekends sometimes, or I can't remember what I would tell her to be able to fly out there. But she would let me go visit my sister and I would go up there just to get away from my mom and dad because I just didn't want to be at home. It was so heavy being at home. It was like an escape for me to go. So when I finally got to leave and go to college, I wasn't like, my sister was crying and stuff. I wasn't sad. I just was like ready for the next part. I'm like, okay, like this is cool. I can be away from. I felt really guilty because my little brother was still at home and I knew he was going to struggle and he had to deal with all. He was younger. He 5 years younger than me. He was still in middle school. And I'm like heartbroken about him, but also really grateful to finally be away from all the stuff. And it kind of felt like an escape for me. But yeah, I think college was hard in a good way. Um, and I think it started to teach me a lot of things, that being exposed to other people's stories and the way that they lived really made me be like, what? I didn't know that you could have a perspective like that. Or I didn't know that there was people that were my age that they go and set doctor's appointments, or they go to the grocery store. They know how to take care of themselves. They decorate their own rooms. They have debit cards and credit cards and cars. And seeing the real world and like people actually taking care of themselves, I remember that being a shock to me because I didn't really know how to do that. I didn't have like those habits built in, or the understanding of that's what you're supposed to do in life. You're supposed to be growing to a place where you can be able to take care of yourself. And that was like very, it threw me off a lot too when I got to college of seeing that. And I think even attributed more to me feeling so depressed because even doing the smallest tasks, like not having a car and trying to get to the grocery store and having to ask somebody to take me, it was like, I can't do it. And I would just stay at home, or I would spend my dining dollars at the corner store and get a bunch of frozen food and stuff just to avoid having to ask somebody for a favor or like interact with somebody on that level. And I just stayed alone because I didn't even want to have to do that part.
Why do you think it was a shock that people were kind of independent adults and kind of doing their own thing, buying their own groceries?
I mean, my mom took care of all that stuff. She took care of the groceries and stuff like that. But we also weren't super encouraged to like have our own lives. If we were asking, and this is a part of what attributed to me being such a loner and so depressed, I think too. I'm not saying it's like completely my mom's fault at all, but I think the way I processed the life that I was living contributed to me like not understanding simple life things. So like, even I just got my license when I graduated from Purdue, my final year of college. Like when we were younger, my parents didn't decide to send us through driver's training school. Sometimes it was like money stuff, but then sometimes it was just like the difficulty of asking for something and it being done, you know, or getting a state ID. I didn't have a state ID until like 2 years until I transferred to UTEP. I never had a state ID before. She never would like let us drive or send us out to get groceries or just make plans with friends. My sister started to make plans with friends and I would always mooch off their friends because I didn't know how to do it myself. But if I asked my mom like, oh, I got this friend and she want me to come spend the night, either she would just avoid the conversation or act like I didn't ask the question. And then if I ask again, I'm bothering her, so I knew I had to shut up and just kind of let it pass or whatever. It was just, I think my mom was so overwhelmed. And then my dad just working his butt off every day from sun up to sundown. Like the little life things seemed like too much stress. Like that was too much to ask. That was like, I don't know, wasn't something I was supposed to do. So I didn't pay attention to it. I never developed those type of things. And then when I got to college and saw other people that had or that knew how to do those things, I just was like, I just don't know how to do it. And even that feeling of their stress whenever I asked about something simple like that, getting on to me. So now it could be as simple as me logging onto a website or Googling the DMV or something like that. And me just thinking about it, I'm like, I don't even know what the name of the place is, just preventing me from even Googling it or getting to the website finally and then not knowing where the freaking button is to schedule the appointment and just getting overwhelmed and feeling all this stress on me and like just so much anxiety that I just was like, I can't. But I'm too embarrassed to ask for help because it seems so simple for them. And I would just live within myself, and not really engage in those parts of life that I wasn't prepared for, that I hadn't learned how to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. I think that's really interesting because it's just a reminder that like how we grow up as kids can kind of, well, plays a big role in how we experience the world and who we are as adults and the things we know and the things we don't know.
Yeah,
And it's not even like blame to parents. It's like, because no one is perfect, even our parents
right.
or grandparents. It's like parents do what they know and they probably get that from their parents who did what they knew. I mean, it just trickles down, but then it's like at the end of the day, once like we become adults, then we start to like have to think about these things. Okay, I want to do this. How do I do it? And we have to try to figure it out. And it's a lot of things that can contribute to like how we view the world and how we're living it, like how do we feel internally like about ourselves in the world. So appreciate you just going through that, because it's like sometimes I think with depression, like this is something that I've experienced too, it can be kind of hard to pinpoint what is, I don't know what's wrong. Like I do these big things, but there's also like a lot of little stuff that's just contributing to it. So just trying to like get a picture, a broader picture of your story. So you met Pate at UTEP, so University of Texas, El Paso. Where and when did y'all meet? What year was that for you?
It was probably 2022. I met her at FCA. Because I remember I went to FCA. I had been at UTEP for a semester. And then I went to FCA in like December, like the new year, around the new year. I had finally went. And I met her that first night.
What made you want to start going to FCA, which is Fellowship of Christian Athletes?
Yeah. So like I said, I was dealing with depression, dealing with super low lows, living in a life of sin. I with me not going to church as much and getting older, seeing the ways of the world, I kind of chose to go to the ways of the world. I didn't really have a foundation of faith to know how to satisfy my needs in Christ, or how Christ even satisfied them. So I went to worldly things and I was living in a life of sin. When I started college, that's when I really started pursuing those things in my mind, because I had already been smoking weed. I had already been, I think I had drank a couple of times, but little stuff like that, and then conversations on your phone, the way you text people or boys that you think are cute, and those conversations, it can be very sinful. It can be like very much in the dark, very much like talking about things your parents wouldn't approve of. So those things were already starting. And then when I got to college, really just started pursuing them. And I had reached a very low. I like really reached rock bottom, where I was thinking about death all the time. I was thinking about not wanting to be here day in and day out. I'd be at practice, to the point where I'm in practice and I can't stop thinking about it. I just kind of cried out to God, because the whole time I'm trying to worship. I'm trying to read my grandma's Bible that I kept with me. I'm like trying to figure out, how do I have a relationship with God? Is he supposed to be the answer? I know something about him is supposed to be the way that I deal with this, or that God is the one that cares about me. And I prayed that prayer in my room. That's what I told you before we started recording, where I had a transparent moment with God. And I had heard about FCA a lot throughout the year, and I had wanted to go. Like I was asking my teammates for like, yeah, FCA or whatever, but we never actually really go. And I'm like, please somebody go. But eventually I had had enough, to the point where I was like, I'm just going to go by myself. And I think God's response to that prayer and my response to actually asking that prayer, like the faith behind it, which is crazy that I even had faith in that time. The faith behind it was me showing up to a place that I thought that God would be at. And that's why I went to FCA for the first time.
So I want to kind of talk about your experience at FCA and just meeting Pate and just kind of all of that, because it seems like it was life-changing for you. So you talked about living in sin. You mentioned depression, and then smoking weed, and just hitting rock bottom and thinking about death. Before we started recording, you talked about a relationship that you had and homosexuality and all of those things. What would you say made you hit rock bottom? There are probably a ton of people doing those things that you named, and maybe doesn't always seem like a problem. So what was the problem for you, would you say?
I think there's a couple of things. One thing that for sure began to compound was the level of sin that I was like interacting with. I had never been intimate with anybody. And I'll just be very transparent, because the Lord has like set me free. And I know that there are people bound. And a part of why we talk about our testimony with such transparency is because, as a Christian, as someone who's experienced the hope of Christ and the power of the cross, and the fact that Christ actually defeated everything that claims my life, the reason why I'm guilty, he's atoned for that guilt. So now when I talk about the things that would cause guilt, or the things that are on my record, I talk about them with freedom, because they've been blotted out. So I